Woohoo!
So I think it makes sense to start talking about some specific emotions. And
Yeah, I've already kind of gone
jumped into my first one, anger.
Anger.
It seems like kind of like the emotion.
The emotion.
Right? It's like the most obvious one, right?
Definitely.
It's like, so what does anger feel like?
There have been countless like metaphors used to describe what anger feels like, because it's like just such a like a big emotion. But like the most common one would be like kind of like a volcano erupting underneath your skin. It's like you're like on fire. You're like so like ready for like action, for like anger is very connected to violence. I said, where you're like ready to like act out and fight out and do this, and that's because anger is like normally like connected in a way to like something like fear, where it'll stem from that like fight or flight. But anger is so overwhelming. It's so like so like hot, and it feels like it's the emotion that is what I said most associated with action, which is why it's so overwhelming, because it's sort of like that's the emotion you feel before you do something. Because we're like, happiness is mostly interpreted as like a way more passive emotion, like maybe the most passive emotion. Sadness is like almost as passive as that. Like things like fear are like that's pretty connected to anger in a way, but that's more seen as like kind of like getting away from the action instead of participating in it. But anger is always like leaping in, like doing something, and anger is seen as the most masculine emotion. In terms of what we were talking about earlier, how like emotion is connected to thought, disconnected from thought.
I think there's a phrase that would contradict that. Something as bad as a woman's scorn or wrath or.
Okay, but when you see anger just depicted, it's anger is seen as the most masculine emotion in terms of what we were talking about before. Like when we were seeing in action movies, the most masculine movie. Where they're always like they're shooting guns and they're killing people and they're lashing out, and it's always anger, and that's seen as the active emotion. Sometimes that's reaction to someone else's passive emotion, like, oh my gosh, this woman is sad, we have to fight on behalf of her.
How does anger affect your thoughts?
It really like speeds them up. When you're angry, you're jumping to like the next thing.
Jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, you're not really being logical, which is funny. You're sort of going to the next thing. You're pushed into action. You're like, I'm gonna punch this guy in the face, and I'm gonna punch this other guy in the face, and then I'm gonna shoot my gun real tough. And it's like you're like going to the next thing. You're not really focused on where that will lead you. You're not really focused on the consequences of those actions, whatever that is. You're not really focused on like what exactly it is that you're doing, just that you're kind of expelling this anger like physically. Like I said, it's the volcano erupting underneath your skin. This is the volcano like getting out. This is you expressing it however you can, and your thoughts are like jumping to join you, where it's like this is happening, now this is happening, now this is happening, now this is happening, or this will happen, now this will happen, now this will happen.
I think that people talk about being blinded by anger.
Blinded by anger, yeah, that's a really good one.
Right, it can kind of almost like take away your ability to think.
Yeah. But this is also a really good example of how thought and emotion are connected instead of like fighting against each other, because it's not like there's like some like personification of thought hovering over your shoulder being like, maybe we should think about this in a better way. It's like that thought is right there and it's right angry with you.
How does anger affect your body?
Like adrenaline. It's
amped up.
It'll like there's like a bunch of scientific things for adrenaline. Like it'll shoot your blood to like your muscles, so you're able to like fight. You're able to flight. It's like that's really like fear, but like fear is connected to anger. I mentioned that. But anger will basically just like it'll amp you up. It'll make like everything seem heightened. It'll like improve your eyesight. It'll improve everything. It's like you're basically running on this high. And you're able to do. You feel like you're able to do anything. You feel like you want to do anything, but not in a really a good way. You feel like you want to like do a lot of bad things. You want to express that anger in whatever way you can, and your body reacts to that. And that's like another way of like, oh, like body versus thought versus emotion. It's like it's all one thing, and you're like angry, and your body's angry, and you're willing to like expel that. You're willing to jump into action. You're willing to be like pow pow. Until eventually that high inevitably runs out.
Is anger positive or negative?
Negative. Because what anger will do, unlike something like sadness, is it will like take you into action. It'll be like we have a problem now. And that's like sadness is like we have a problem now. Anger is like we're gonna solve it. So sometimes anger can be like productive. It can be constructive. It can like lead itself to good things. But that's what you always see in the action movies. It's like the anger leads them to like save the day. But generally, anger it's not pleasant to feel. Like it's unpleasant. That's specifically what it is. You don't want to feel angry.
Or I think the negativity is even more of the judgment it makes on the external.
Exactly.
Right? Like there's something bad.
Yeah.
And that makes you angry.
Yeah. Anger's not happy to feel because anger's not good to feel because whatever's happening around you is not good. That's why the anger's coming out. That's why the anger's doing all this. So when you're feeling angry and when you're doing all these things, you're feeling really bad about it. Like you're so focused on the anger, you're so focused on the bad thing that you're like and eventually like anger is like connected to all these negative emotions, all these emotions are connected, whatever. But like at the end of that anger, you're probably gonna feel like not really satisfied with what you've done, but just like sad about like the reason that you did it.
Well, I think a common reaction to acting on anger is regret.
Yes.
Right, people talk about that.
Yeah, people always say, like, anger makes you say things that you don't really mean. And I've been talking a lot about action, a lot about, like, violence, about, like, the expression of anger, like these action movies that are kind of, like, divorced from reality. But in reality, what anger makes you do, besides, like, beating someone up, is when you're engaged in these conversations, it'll make you say things that are, like, you don't really want to say. And that's what the thoughts do. Thoughts like coming right along with you. It's like say this, say this, say this. What anger is doing, anger is normally a reaction to like a hurt of some kind, a fear of some kind, a bad thing of some kind. It's always a reaction to a bad thing. And so what you want to do is you want to take that anger and you want to hurt someone else with it. Right. And when it comes to conversations, that can really mess someone up because depending on like how close you are to a person or like what you're actually saying or like how much you know about them, when your thoughts are coming right along that anger and they're like acting as one, they're not like separate, those angry thoughts, those angry words that come out of you when you have no impulse control, you have no thought of like the consequences, and you have no thought of really other people's feelings besides making them feel how I feel right now, then you say a lot of things you don't mean, you say a lot of things that you didn't want to say, and you end up with, at the end of that high that you were on, that like angry high, that's certainly a bad thing, but almost like a satisfying thing. After the satisfaction, there's left nothing but like regret.
On some level, whether it's physical or verbal or otherwise, anger is a call to violence. And it feels good sometimes to be violent.
Definitely. That's why people love watching action movies.
We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.